I stared at my phone in disbelief, the hospital gown still crinkling as I shifted in the recovery room bed. 6 missed calls from my bank, and a fraud alert text message that made my blood run cold. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Unusual withdrawal of $87,500 from joint savings account, Libra 4721. I wasn't supposed to be looking at my phone yet. The nurse had warned me to rest after my spinal surgery. But something had felt wrong when I woke up and Rachel wasn't there. My name is Michael Brennan, 42 years old, a structural engineer who spent the last 15 years building bridges across America, while my own life was quietly crumbling beneath me. The surgery I'd just undergone was the result of a workplace accident 3 months earlier. A steel beam had fallen during an inspection, leaving me with a damaged vertebra and a long recovery ahead. Rachel had seemed supportive at first, bringing me ice packs and pain medication, scheduling my doctor's appointments, and assuring me everything would be fine. "Don't worry about work," she'd said. "We have savings. Just focus on getting better." And those words echoed mockingly in my head as I pressed the call button for the nurse. When she arrived, I asked if my wife had left any message about where she'd gone. "She said something came up with her mother," the nurse replied. "She mentioned she'd be back tomorrow to pick you up. Do you need me to call someone else?" I shook my head and thanked her. Rachel's mother had been dead for 5 years. I called our bank using my personal authorization code to bypass the usual security questions. The customer service representative confirmed what I already suspected. Rachel had walked into our local branch that morning, just as my surgery began, and withdrawn nearly all our joint savings in cashier's checks. The transaction had only triggered an alert because of the amount, not because she lacked authorization. "Would you like to report this as fraud, Mr. Brennan?" the representative asked. "Not yet," I replied. "Let me make a few calls first." I hung up and immediately dialed my brother Ethan. When he answered, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Rachel cleaned out our savings while I was in surgery. I need you to come get me tomorrow instead of her." There was a pause on the line. "Are you serious? All of it?" "Almost. $87,500. "Jesus, Mike, I've been telling you for years that something wasn't right with her." He had been, and I'd defended Rachel every time. I'd attributed his concerns to the natural protectiveness of an older brother, to his own failed marriage making him cynical. I'd been wrong. "She told the hospital she was going to her mother's," I said. "Her dead mother." "Exactly." Another pause. "What about your recovery? The doctor said you'd need supervision for at least a week." "I'll figure something out. Just come get me tomorrow at 11. After hanging up, I closed my eyes and tried to think. The pain medication made it difficult to focus, but certain moments of clarity cut through the haze. Rachel's increasingly frequent girls' weekends that coincided with my work trips. The new clothes and jewelry she claimed were sale finds when the price tags told a different story. The way she'd stopped asking about my projects, stopped wanting to hear about my day. The signs had been there for months, maybe longer. I hadn't wanted to see them because acknowledging them meant admitting I'd failed at another marriage. This was my second, after all. My first wife and I had parted amicably after realizing we'd grown in different directions. No drama, no betrayal, just two people mature enough to recognize when something wasn't working. Rachel had swept into my life 6 months later, all energy and enthusiasm, telling me how amazing it was to meet a man who built things that lasted. The irony wasn't lost on me. I reached for my phone again and opened a banking app, one Rachel didn't know existed. The balance displayed made me exhale slowly. $236,479.12. The account had been growing steadily for the past 3 years. Ever since I'd overheard Rachel on the phone with someone, her voice dropping to a whisper when she realized I was home. "I can't talk about this now," she'd said. "He just got back." She'd played it off as a surprise she was planning, and I'd pretended to believe her. But something had shifted in me that day. I'd started directing a portion of each paycheck to a separate account, one I never mentioned and never accessed from our home devices. It wasn't that I'd been planning for this exact scenario, more that I'd been preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. A text message lit up my phone. "Rachel. Sorry I couldn't stay. Mum needed me. Everything went well with surgery?" I stared at the message, this casual lie from the woman who'd shared my bed for 7 years. I typed back, "Everything's fine. When will you be back?" Her response came quickly. "Tomorrow morning to pick you up. Love you." I set the phone down without replying. There was a strange calm settling over me. Maybe it was the medication, or maybe it was the certainty that comes with finally seeing the truth. Either way, I knew what I had to do. I called my office manager, explaining that I'd need to work remotely longer than anticipated due to complications with my recovery. Then I called my attorney, Jack Westfield, leaving a message asking him to contact me as soon as possible. Finally, I called a real estate agent I'd worked with on several projects. "Denise, it's Michael Brennan. I need to liquidate my rental properties, all 3 of them, as quickly and quietly as possible." Rachel didn't know about those either. They'd been investments I'd made before meeting her, modest houses in developing neighborhoods that had appreciated nicely. I'd kept them separate from our marital finances, managing them through my own LLC, another precaution I'd taken without fully admitting to myself why I felt the need to do so. The nurse returned with pain medication, looking concerned at my elevated heart rate. "You should rest, Mr. Brennan. Whatever's happening can wait until morning." I nodded and took the pills, knowing she was right. I needed a clear head to navigate what was coming. As I drifted off to sleep, my thoughts weren't on the $87,500 that Rachel had taken, but on what she'd left behind. Not just the secret account, or the rental properties, but the pieces of myself I'd compromised trying to make her happy. Those were the real losses I'd been accumulating year after year. And somehow, even through the haze of post-surgical pain, I felt lighter knowing I wouldn't be losing anymore. Morning came with the routine hospital chaos, vital checks, doctor rounds, physical therapy evaluations. Through it all, I watched the clock, knowing that at 11 a.m. the story I'd been living would fundamentally change. At 10:30, my phone buzzed. "In the parking lot," Ethan texted. "Coming up." I replied simply, "Rachel might be here soon too." 15 minutes later, Ethan walked into my room, carrying a small duffel bag with fresh clothes. He looked around, assessing the situation with the tactical precision he'd developed during his years as a police detective. "No sign of her in the lobby or elevator," he said. "You ready to move?" I nodded. "Help me get dressed." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The process was slow and uncomfortable. Every movement sent jolts of pain through my spine, despite the medication. Ethan was patient, making jokes to distract me from both the physical discomfort and the emotional storm brewing just below the surface. "You know," he said as he helped me into a button-down shirt, "I never liked her, but I didn't think she'd pull something like this." "That makes 2 of us," I replied. We were nearly finished when my phone lit up with Rachel's name. I showed the screen to Ethan, who shook his head. "Let it go to voicemail. See what story she's spinning now." I followed his advice, and a minute later, the voicemail notification appeared. I put it on speaker. "Hey babe, I'm running a little late. Mom's not feeling well. I think it's her blood pressure again. I should be there by noon. Love you." Ethan's expression hardened. "Her dead mother's blood pressure is acting up? That's commitment to a lie." "Let's go," I said, suddenly eager to be anywhere but that hospital room. The nurse came in with discharge papers and looked surprised to see Ethan. "Your wife called to say she's running late," she explained. "My brother will be taking me." "Home," I replied, signing the forms without further explanation. 20 minutes later, we were in Ethan's SUV, heading not to the suburban house I shared with Rachel, but to Ethan's condo in the city. The drive was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts, until Ethan broke the silence. "What's your plan here, Mike? Because you can't just let her take your money and walk away." "I'm not," I assured him. "I'm just not going to be there when she realizes I know." Ethan nodded, approving of the strategy. "Good. Give yourself some space to think clearly, but you'll need to move fast on the legal front. Already called Jack yesterday. He's meeting me at your place this afternoon." My brother looked impressed. "You're handling this better than I expected." The truth was, I wasn't handling it at all. I was operating on autopilot, letting the methodical, problem-solving part of my brain take over, while the emotional part remained conveniently numb. The real reckoning would come later, I knew, but for now, I was grateful for the distance between action and feeling. Jack Westfield arrived at Ethan's condo at 2 p.m. with his briefcase and a grim expression. He'd been my attorney for over a decade, handling everything from contracts to my first divorce. He listened without interruption as I explained the situation, occasionally making notes on his legal pad. "So to summarize," he said when I finished, "your wife withdrew $87 to $500 from your joint savings while you were in surgery, lied about her whereabouts, and has no idea that you have separate assets she's unaware of." "That's about it," I confirmed. "And you want to file for divorce?" It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes." Jack nodded. "We can do that. The unauthorized withdrawal will help our case, especially given the timing and circumstances. The separate assets maintained before and during the marriage should remain yours, but we'll need to move quickly to protect them." He outlined the next steps: filing the petition, securing temporary orders to prevent Rachel from accessing any remaining joint accounts, documenting the fraud, and preparing for the inevitability that she would hire her own attorney once she realized what was happening. "What about the house?" I asked. "Both your names are on the deed?" I nodded. "We'll include it in the filing. Given that she's effectively abandoned the marital home and committed financial misconduct, we have a strong case for you retaining primary ownership, but be prepared for it to become a negotiation point." Just after Jack left, promising to file the paperwork first thing in the morning, Ethan helped me settle into his guest room. The pain medication was wearing off, and both my back and my thoughts were becoming increasingly uncomfortable. "You should rest," Ethan said, setting a glass of water and my pills on the nightstand. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He was right, but sleep seemed impossible. I lay awake, replaying conversations and moments from my marriage, searching for the exact point where things had gone wrong. Was it when Rachel started her interior design business, suddenly surrounding herself with new people and influences? Was it earlier, when I'd taken on more projects, spending weeks at a time on job sites across the country? Or had the seeds been there from the beginning, hidden beneath the passion and promises? My phone buzzed repeatedly throughout the evening, Rachel calling, then texting with increasing urgency. "Where are you? The hospital said your brother picked you up. Michael, please call me. I'm worried. I came home, and you're not here. What's going on? Why aren't you answering me? I know you're seeing these messages." Finally, at 10:37 p.m., I texted back, "I know you emptied our savings account yesterday morning. I know your mother has been dead for 5 years. Don't contact me again, except through my attorney." Her response was immediate. "I can explain everything. It's not what you think." I turned off my phone without replying and took my medication. As the pain subsided, I found myself thinking not about Rachel or the money, but about the bridges I'd spent my career building, their careful design, the precise calculations that ensured they could withstand pressure and time. I'd approached them with such attention to detail, such commitment to structural integrity. Why hadn't I applied the same principles to my own life? The next morning, I woke to the sound of Ethan making coffee. My phone, which I'd turned back, showed 17 missed calls from Rachel and dozens of text messages ranging from apologetic to angry. I ignored them all and called Jack instead. "Papers are being filed as we speak," he assured me. "There's something else you should know. I had my investigator do some preliminary checking on your wife's recent activities. There's evidence she's been seeing someone, a client from her design business, man named Christopher Walsh." The name was familiar. Rachel had mentioned him several times over the past year, a wealthy divorcee rebuilding his life in a downtown penthouse. She described him as demanding but generous, spending lavishly on her design recommendations. "How long?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "At least 6 months based on credit card records and hotel stays." 6 months. While I was working 60-hour weeks on a major infrastructure project, while I was recovering from a life-altering injury, while I was planning our future. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "It strengthens our case," Jack replied pragmatically, "especially if we can prove she was using marital funds to facilitate the affair." After hanging up, I joined Ethan in the kitchen. He took one look at my face and poured me a cup of coffee without asking questions. "Rachel's been having an affair," I said after taking a sip. "Guy named Christopher Walsh, one of her clients." Ethan nodded slowly. "You want me to run a background check on him?" The offer was tempting. Ethan had access to databases and information networks that could uncover things Jack's investigator might miss. But I shook my head. "No, I don't care who he is. I just want to get through this and move on." The words felt true as I said them. The revelation of the affair should have devastated me, but instead it merely confirmed what I'd already sensed, that my marriage had become a hollow structure, maintaining the appearance of stability while crumbling from within. "Your phone's buzzing again," Ethan pointed out. I glanced at the screen. Rachel again. But this time the message made me pause. "I'm outside Ethan's building. We need to talk." Ethan saw my expression change. "What is it?" I showed him the message, and he immediately moved to the window, pushing aside the curtain to look down at the street. "Son of a bitch," he muttered. "She's actually down there." I stood carefully, mindful of my back, and joined him at the window. Sure enough, Rachel's white Audi was parked across the street, and she was standing beside it, looking up at the building. Even from 15 floors up, I could see she was wearing one of her power outfits, the tailored black dress and red blazer she saved for important client meetings. How did she know I was here? I wondered aloud. Ethan's face darkened. Location sharing on your phone, maybe? Or she tried all the obvious places? I checked my phone settings and realized he was right. Our location sharing was still active. I turned it off immediately. "What do you want to do?" Ethan asked. "I can go down there and tell her to leave." I considered it for a moment, then shook my head. "No, I should talk to her. Get it over with." Ethan looked skeptical. "You sure? That's wise. You're still recovering, and she's clearly in manipulation mode." "I'll be fine," I assured him. "Have her come up. You can stay in the room if you want." "Damn right I'll stay in the room," he muttered, already texting the building's security to allow Rachel up. 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Ethan opened it, his body language deliberately unwelcoming, as Rachel stepped into the apartment. She looked immaculate as always, her dark hair falling in perfect waves, her makeup flawless. The only sign of distress was the slight redness around her eyes, carefully concealed but visible to someone who knew her face as well as I did. "Michael," she said, her voice softer than usual, "we need to talk privately." Whatever you have. To say, you can say in front of Ethan, I replied, remaining seated on the couch to avoid the pain of standing longer than necessary. She hesitated, then set her purse down and took a seat in the armchair across from me, smoothing her dress with practiced elegance. I know how this looks, she began, but it's not what you think. The money. I had to withdraw it quickly because of an investment opportunity, something that would benefit both of us. An investment opportunity, I repeated flatly, while I was in surgery. The timing was unfortunate, I admit. But Christopher, Mr. Walsh, he connected me with this amazing opportunity. A property that's going to double in value within a year. I was going to surprise you with it once the deal was finalized. I noticed she didn't address the lie about her mother or explain why she hadn't been at the hospital when I woke up. Is that why you've been staying at hotels with him for the past 6 months, discussing investment opportunities? Her composure faltered momentarily before she recovered. That's business, Michael. I've been expanding my client base, networking. Sometimes meetings run late. In hotel rooms. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. Look, I know you're upset about the money. I should have discussed it with you first. That was wrong of me. But I can fix this. The investment hasn't been finalized yet. I can put the money back. This isn't about the money, Rachel. Then what is it about? Because whatever you think is happening, I can explain. I studied her face. This woman I'd shared my life with for 7 years, whose smile had once been the highlight of my day, whose ambitions I'd supported even when they took her further from me. What I saw now wasn't remorse or even fear, but calculation. She was trying to figure out exactly how much I knew and how to minimize the damage. I filed for divorce this morning, I said simply. The words hung in the air between us. Rachel's expression shifted from calculated concern to genuine shock. Divorce? Michael, that's insane. We've been happy. We've built a life together. Have we? I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like we've been living separate lives for a long time. You have your design business and your clients and your investments. I have my projects and my work trips. When was the last time we actually connected about anything meaningful? She started to speak, then stopped, reconsidering her approach. When she continued, her voice had hardened slightly. So this is about your insecurities. You've been feeling neglected because of my career success, and now you're overreacting to a simple financial decision. Ethan made a disgusted noise from his position by the window, but I held up a hand to stop him from intervening. This isn't about insecurities, Rachel. It's about honesty. You lied about where you were going yesterday. You lied about your mother, who's been dead for 5 years, by the way. You withdrew our savings without discussion while I was literally on an operating table, and you've been having an affair with Christopher Walsh. Her eyes widened slightly at the last accusation, but she recovered quickly. You had me investigated? That's a violation of my privacy. That's what you're concerned about right now? Your privacy? I'm concerned about you making rash decisions based on incomplete information and paranoid assumptions, she countered. We can work through this, Michael. We've faced challenges before. For a moment, I almost laughed at the absurdity of her framing our situation as just another challenge to overcome. But the pain in my back reminded me that I needed to end this conversation. The divorce papers have been filed, I said firmly. My attorney will handle all communication going forward. The money you took, keep it. Consider it the cost of my freedom. Rachel's professional facade cracked completely then, her eyes narrowing with sudden anger. You think you're being so noble, so above it all, she snapped. But what about our house, our life? You're just going to throw everything away. You threw it away when you decided our vows meant nothing. She stood abruptly, grabbing her purse. You'll regret this, Michael. When you're alone with your self-righteousness and your Your bridges, you'll realize what you've lost. I already know exactly what I've lost, I replied calmly, and what I've gained. He doesn't know about your little secret, does he? Rachel said suddenly, looking at Ethan with a triumphant smile. About the panic attacks, the medication, your perfect brother isn't as stable as he pretends to be. Ethan's expression remained neutral, but I could see the slight tension in his jaw. Rachel had always been skilled at finding vulnerabilities and exploiting them. That's enough, I said, standing despite the pain. Leave now, or Ethan will call. Security. She looked between us, realizing her attempt to create division had failed. With a final glare, she turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was profound. Ethan moved to the kitchen without a word, returning with 2 glasses of water. He handed one to me as I carefully lowered myself, back onto the couch. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "No," I admitted, "but I will be." The days that followed settled into a strange routine. My physical recovery progressed slowly, with twice-weekly therapy sessions teaching me how to move without exacerbating my injury. My emotional recovery was less linear, moments of clarity and conviction interrupted by waves of doubt and grief. Not grief for Rachel, or even for my failed marriage, but for the years I'd spent ignoring what was right in front of me. Jack called, regularly with updates. Rachel had hired a high-profile divorce attorney known for aggressive tactics. She was contesting the divorce filing, claiming temporary insanity due to stress and requesting reconciliation counseling. When that approach failed, she switched to demands: half of all my assets, ownership of the house, and alimony based on my significantly higher earning potential. She doesn't know about the separate accounts or the rental properties, Jack reminded me during one call. We're in a stronger position than she realizes. She'll find out eventually during discovery, I pointed out. True, but by then we'll have established the financial misconduct and abandonment. Plus, we have the affair evidence. The judge, assigned to your case, is particularly unsympathetic to infidelity. 3 weeks after surgery, I was cleared to return to limited work duties. I started with remote consultations, reviewing plans and participating in video conferences from Ethan's condo. The familiar technical challenges and problem-solving helped anchor me during a time when everything else felt uncertain. It was during a routine check of my business email that I discovered something unexpected, a message from Christopher Walsh. "We need to talk," the subject line read simply. The body of the email was equally terse. "I believe we have matters to discuss regarding Rachel. I can meet you wherever is convenient. This isn't what you think." I forwarded the email to Jack before replying, "I have nothing to discuss with you." Walsh's response came within minutes. "She lied to me too, about being separated from you, about where the money came from, about a lot of things. I'm not your enemy here." Against Jack's advice, I agreed to meet Walsh at a coffee shop near Ethan's building. My brother insisted on accompanying me, sitting at a nearby table where he could intervene if necessary. Christopher Walsh was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s to my early 40s. Expensively dressed, but with an anxious energy that seemed at odds with the confident businessman Rachel had described. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, as I carefully lowered myself into the chair across from him. "How's your recovery going?" "Let's skip the pleasantries," I replied. "What do you want?" He nodded, seeming relieved to get to the point. "Rachel told me you two were separated, had been for almost a year. She said you had an arrangement, you kept the house for appearances, but you both lived your own lives." That was a lie. "I know that now," he said, rubbing his temple. "Just like I now know the money she invested in my development project wasn't hers to invest." I studied him more carefully. The $87,500 she took while I was in surgery. Yes, she presented it as her own funds from her design business. Said she wanted to be a partner in the property conversion. And you believed her. Walsh sighed. I believed a lot of things she told me, that she was essentially single, that her design business was thriving, that she had independent wealth from a family inheritance. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I'm returning the money, he said, sliding an envelope across the table. It's a cashier's check for the full amount. I can't in good conscience keep it knowing where it came from. I made no move to take the envelope. And you're doing this out of the goodness of your heart. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, he insisted, and because I don't want any part of the mess Rachel's created. When I found out the truth, that you were actively married, that you were having major surgery the day she withdrew the money, I ended things immediately. How noble of you, I said dryly. Walsh had the grace to look embarrassed. Look, I'm not claiming moral high ground here. I got involved with someone I thought was available and got burned. But I'm trying to make it right. I finally took the envelope, opening it to verify the check inside. $87,500 exactly. Plus, I have information you might find useful for your divorce proceedings, Walsh added. Text messages, emails, where Rachel explicitly lied about her marital status and the source of the funds. Why would you help me? I asked, genuinely curious. Because she used me, he said simply. Just like she used you. Different methods, same outcome. And because I have a brother too. He nodded toward Ethan's table. If someone did to him what Rachel did to you, I'd want them to pay for it. I pocketed the check and stood carefully. Send the messages to my attorney. His information is on the divorce filing. Walsh nodded. One more thing you should know. Rachel's been liquidating assets from her design business, selling furniture inventory, cancelling orders, collecting outstanding client payments early with heavy discounts. It looks like she's gathering cash, or planning to disappear. Or preparing for a long legal battle, Walsh suggested. Either way, I thought you should know. I thanked him for the information and left, Ethan falling into step beside me as we exited the coffee shop. You believe him? My brother asked once we were outside. Doesn't matter if I believe him, I replied, patting the envelope in my pocket. The check is real, and the texts will either exist or they won't. When I called Jack to update him, he was cautiously optimistic. If Walsh comes through with those messages, it strengthens our position considerably, and recovering the withdrawn funds negates one of her main claims against you. What about what he said about her liquidating assets? I'll have the investigator look into it, Jack promised. If she's hiding money, we'll find it. That evening, as Ethan and I ate takeout in his living room, I found myself thinking about the rental properties I'd asked Denise to liquidate. The process was already underway. One property had a pending offer. The other two had interested buyers. Soon, those assets would be converted to cash in my private account, further securing my financial independence. You're quiet, Ethan observed. Having second thoughts? I shook my head. Just reflecting on how differently things turned out than I expected. When Rachel and I got married, I thought we were building something lasting. You can still build something lasting, he reminded me. Just not with her. I know, it's just... I searched for the words to express what I was feeling. All those years as a structural engineer, analyzing stress points and load-bearing capacities, I should have seen the warning signs in my own life. Ethan set down his fork. Mike, you're not a failure because your marriage didn't work out. You're human. We all miss things, especially when we don't want to see them. Maybe, I conceded, but I won't miss them again. 2 months after my surgery, I moved out of Ethan's condo and into a small apartment near my office. The divorce proceedings were ongoing, complicated by Rachel's increasingly desperate counterclaims and delaying tactics. She'd attempted to claim that my engineering firm was marital property. It wasn't. I'd established it before our marriage. That she was entitled to my retirement accounts. She wasn't. I had airtight prenuptial protections, and even that she deserved compensation for career sacrifices. She hadn't made any. Her design business had thrived throughout our marriage. The text messages from Walsh had proven genuine and damning, combined with the returned funds and evidence of her attempted liquidation of business assets, which Jack's investigator had confirmed. Rachel's position had weakened considerably. Her attorney had recently reached out about settlement discussions, a sign that she was finally recognizing the inevitability of divorce. I was reviewing the settlement proposal when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Wary of unknown callers since the divorce filing, I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to take the call. "Michael Brennan," I answered. "Mr. Brennan, this is Sandra Kelly from Riverpoint Engineering. We've been following your work on the Lancaster Bridge project, and we're very impressed. We're expanding our infrastructure division and looking for someone with your expertise to lead it. Would you be interested in discussing the opportunity?" Riverpoint was based in Seattle, across the country from the life I'd built with Rachel, from the memories and complications that surrounded me daily. A fresh start in every sense. "I would be very interested," I replied. Later that evening, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled. My phone buzzed with a text from Jack. Rachel accepted the settlement. Divorce could be finalized within 60 days. I felt no triumph, no vindication, just quiet relief. The road to this moment had been painful in every sense, from the physical trauma of my surgery to the emotional wounds of betrayal. Yet standing there, looking out at the horizon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: possibility. My secret account, once a symptom of distrust, had become the foundation for a new beginning. The bridge to my future, built with the same careful planning and attention to structural integrity that had defined my professional life. This time, I wouldn't ignore the warning signs or compromise the design. This time, I would build something truly lasting, not with someone else, but for myself. The days in Ethan's condo blurred together as I recovered from surgery. Physical therapy sessions twice a week left me exhausted, but gradually improving. Each morning, I'd wake up and check my private account, the one Rachel knew nothing about, as if to reassure myself that some part of my life remained untouched by her betrayal. I'd started that account 3 years ago after overhearing a phone conversation that had planted the first seed of doubt in my mind. I remember that day clearly. I'd come home early from a site inspection because of heavy rain. As I entered through the garage, I heard Rachel's voice in the kitchen, speaking in that hushed, intimate tone people use when discussing secrets. "I can't right now," she was saying. "No, he's supposed to be at the Richardson project all day. I know, I miss you too. Soon, I promise." When I deliberately made noise coming through the door, her tone changed immediately. "Yes, that shipment should arrive by Tuesday at the latest. Thank you for checking." A professional ending to what had sounded like a personal call. She greeted me with surprise that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're home early." "Rain delay," I explained, watching her expression carefully. "Everything okay? Just confirming a furniture delivery for the Hendersons' project," she said smoothly, her designer smile firmly in place. "How was your day?" I let it go, told myself I was being paranoid. But that night, while Rachel slept beside me, I lay awake, replaying her words, her tone, the quick shift when she realized she wasn't alone. The next morning, I opened a separate bank account at a different institution than our usual bank and began quietly transferring small amounts with each paycheck. Nothing that would be immediately noticeable, but enough to build a safety net if my suspicions ever proved correct. 3 years later, as I sat in Ethan's guest room looking at the balance of $236 and $479.12, I couldn't decide if I felt vindicated or devastated that my precautions had been necessary. My phone buzzed with a text from Jack Westfield, my attorney. Temporary orders granted. All joint accounts frozen pending divorce proceedings. Rachel can't access any shared finances now. I texted back my thanks, then set the phone aside and attempted to stand without assistance. The pain in my lower back flared immediately, a sharp reminder of my physical vulnerability. The surgeon had inserted 2 metal rods to stabilize my spine where the falling beam had damaged my L4 vertebra. "You're lucky," he told me after the surgery. "Another inch to the left and you might have been paralyzed." Lucky wasn't exactly how I'd describe my current situation, but I understood his point. Things could always be worse. Ethan knocked lightly on the door before entering with a mug of coffee in each hand. "How's the back this morning?" "Still attached," I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Jack got the temporary orders approved. Rachel's cut off from the joint accounts. "Good," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Though based on what Walsh told you, she's probably been siphoning money for months." Christopher Walsh's revelation about Rachel liquidating her business assets had been concerning enough that Jack had immediately hired a forensic accountant, not unlike what I'd done for other people's divorces in my professional capacity as a structural engineer who occasionally testified about building integrity issues. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Probably," I agreed. "But she can't take anything else now." Ethan studied me for a moment. "You know, most people would be falling apart right now. Your wife cleaned out your savings. You discovered she's been having an affair. You're recovering from major surgery, and you're living in your brother's spare room. Yet here you are, calmly drinking coffee and discussing legal strategy." I considered his observation. What would breaking down accomplish? It won't change what happened. No, but it might be a normal human reaction. I sipped my coffee, wincing as I shifted position. "Maybe I'll schedule my breakdown for next Tuesday. I have physical therapy on Monday, and Jack wants to meet Thursday about the discovery requirements." Ethan laughed despite himself. "Fair enough. Just don't bury it so deep that it ambushes you later." After he left for work, I opened my laptop and logged into my company's secure server. Though I was officially on medical leave, I needed something productive to focus on besides Rachel's betrayal and my ongoing divorce. My engineering firm specialized in infrastructure assessment, evaluating the structural integrity of bridges, dams, and other critical structures. Currently, we were consulting on a major bridge rehabilitation project across the Portland Harbor, a complex undertaking that required precise calculations and careful planning. Exactly the kind of detailed work that would occupy my mind. I was deep into analyzing stress test data when my phone rang with Rachel's number. I'd been ignoring her calls and texts for days, but something made me answer this time. "What do you want, Rachel?" Her voice was controlled, but with an undercurrent of panic. "What have you done? I can't access any of our accounts. They're frozen pending divorce proceedings," I explained calmly. "Standard procedure when one spouse commits financial misconduct." "Financial?" She caught herself. "Michael, this is ridiculous. I told you that money was for an investment opportunity." "Right, the one you discussed with your lover while I was having spinal surgery." Silence stretched across the line. "Then you've been talking to Christopher. He returned the money," I informed her. "All 80 cents of $500 of it. Apparently he wasn't comfortable keeping funds that were obtained through deception." "He had no right." "Actually, he had every right," I interrupted. "Considering you lied to him about being separated from me for nearly a year." Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice had taken on the reasonable, slightly patronizing tone she used when negotiating with difficult clients. "Michael, we need to talk in person. This whole situation has spiraled out of control based on misunderstandings and assumptions. If you'd just let me explain. There's nothing to explain, Rachel. You withdrew our savings while I was unconscious. On an operating table, you've been having an affair for at least 6 months. You lied about where you were going the day of my surgery. What part of that is a misunderstanding? That's just it. You're only seeing pieces of a much larger picture. Please just meet with me. We can talk this through like adults. I considered, refusing, but part of me, the part that had spent 7 years building a life with this woman, wanted to hear what possible explanation she could offer. Fine, I conceded. Not at Ethan's. Somewhere public. The cafe at Powell's Books, she suggested immediately. Tomorrow at noon. I agreed and ended the call, then immediately texted Ethan to let him know. His response was predictably protective. Bad idea. She's trying to manipulate you. At least, let me come with you. I assured him I'd be careful, then returned to my work, trying to focus on structural calculations instead of wondering what Rachel could possibly say to justify her actions. The next day, I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, choosing a table with a clear view of both entrances. My back protested as I settled into the chair, a persistent reminder of my physical vulnerability. I'd declined pain medication that morning, wanting a clear head for whatever Rachel might throw at me. She arrived exactly on time, dressed in the cream-colored suit she wore for initial client consultations, designed to project competence with approachable warmth. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, her makeup subtle but flawless. To anyone watching, she would appear to be a successful professional meeting a colleague, not a wife who had betrayed her husband at his most vulnerable moment. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sitting across from me. Her eyes assessed me quickly, noting the stiffness in my posture, the careful way I held myself. "How's your recovery going?" "Let's skip the pleasantries," I replied. "You wanted to talk, so talk." She set her purse on the table, her composure unwavering despite my coldness. "I want to explain about the money. It wasn't how it looked." "You mean it wasn't you emptying our joint savings without discussion while I was having surgery?" "The timing was unfortunate," she admitted, "but the opportunity was time-sensitive. Christopher, Mr. Walsh, had presented an investment that required immediate funding, a property downtown that's being converted to luxury condos. The projected return is substantial." "And you couldn't wait until I was conscious to discuss it?" "You would have said no," she stated matter-of-factly. "You always say no to my investment ideas. You're so risk-averse with money that we've missed countless opportunities over the years." I stared at her, incredulous. "So you decided to just take it instead? That's theft, Rachel." "It's not theft when it's our joint account," she countered. "I have equal right to those funds." "Equal right to discuss their use," I corrected. "Not equal right to clean them out without a word." She sighed, as if I were being deliberately obtuse. "I was going to tell you once the investment was secured. It was meant to be a positive surprise, something that would benefit both of us." "And the affair with Walsh? Was that going to benefit both of us too?" Her expression hardened slightly. "My relationship with Christopher is professional with elements of personal friendship. You've completely mischaracterized it based on your insecurities. Professional relationships don't typically involve hotel stays and intimate dinners," I pointed out. "Walsh admitted everything, Rachel. He showed Jack the text messages where you explicitly told him we'd been separated for a year." She faltered momentarily, then recovered. "Christopher misunderstood the nature of our marital difficulties. I may have exaggerated certain aspects of our relationship to facilitate the business partnership, but that doesn't constitute an affair." The calculated way she reframed her betrayal made something shift inside me. This wasn't the woman I'd fallen in love with 7 years ago, or perhaps she had always been this person, and I'd been too blinded by attraction and optimism to see it. "Why are we really here, Rachel?" I asked wearily. "What do you want?" She leaned forward, dropping the professional veneer to reveal a hint of the vulnerability I'd once found so compelling. "I want us to reconsider this divorce. We've built a life together, Michael. 7 years of memories and shared dreams. Are you really willing to throw all that away over a misunderstanding about money and some inappropriate texts?" "You left me alone at the hospital," I reminded her. "You lied about where you were going." "I was emotional and confused," she countered. "Finding out about your secret account threw me off balance." I frowned. "What are you talking about? What secret account?" A triumphant gleam appeared in her eyes. "The one you've been hiding for years. Over $200,000 that you never told me about. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" My mind raced. How had she discovered the account? I'd been meticulously careful, using a separate email address, paperless statements, a different bank entirely. "How did you left your laptop open last year when you went to check on the grill," she explained. "I happened to see an email notification from a bank I didn't recognize. At first I thought it was for one of your clients, but then I saw your name on the statement." I remembered that evening, a rare weekend when we'd both been home, grilling on the deck of our house. I'd been checking work emails while monitoring the food, stepping away just for a moment. A careless mistake that had exposed my precautions. "So you knew for a year and never said anything, I asked. "I was hoping you'd tell me yourself," she replied, "that you'd trust me enough to share whatever concerns had led you to hide money from your wife. When you didn't, I started to wonder what else you might be hiding." The irony of her questioning my honesty while actively engaging in an affair wasn't lost on me. "So you decided to take the joint savings as what? Compensation? Punishment?" "Insurance," she corrected. "You clearly didn't trust me with financial information. Why should I leave myself vulnerable?" "And the affair with Walsh?" She looked away briefly. "That was complicated. I felt isolated in our marriage. You were always working, always focused on your projects and firm. Christopher listened. He valued my input, my creativity. I supported your design business from the beginning," I reminded her. "Funded the startup costs entirely from my savings, celebrated every client you landed." "Financial support isn't the same as emotional engagement," she countered. "When was the last time you asked me about my designs, my creative process, my professional challenges?" The accusation struck a nerve. Had I been distant, preoccupied with my own work to the point of neglecting hers? It was possible. The last few years had been intensely busy as my firm expanded. But that didn't justify her actions. "If you felt neglected, you could have said something," I pointed out. "Instead, you chose to lie, steal, and cheat." "I'm trying to be honest now," she insisted. "I'm acknowledging my mistakes and asking for another chance. People rebuild marriages after much worse, Michael." I studied her face, the face I'd woken up to for 7 years, the face I'd once believed would be beside me for decades to come. There was sincerity there, or at least a convincing facsimile of it, but there was also calculation, a careful assessment of what approach might best serve her interests. "What about the divorce filing?" I asked. "Your attorney has been fighting every step of the process." "I'll call him off," she promised quickly. "We can start counseling, work through this together. The money, I'll return it all. Christopher already gave you the investment portion, and I can access the rest." "So you didn't spend it?" She shook her head. "Most of it is in a separate account. I was preparing for contingencies, just as I had been with my secret account." We were more alike than I cared to admit, both quietly preparing for the worst while pretending to hope for the best. "I need time to think," I said finally. "This isn't a decision I can make over coffee." Relief flickered across her face. She'd expected outright rejection. "Of course, take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." As we parted outside Powell's, she leaned in as if to kiss my cheek, a habitual gesture, then caught herself and stepped back. "Call me when you're ready to talk again." I watched her walk away, noticing how she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin once she thought I couldn't see her anymore. The subtle transformation from seemingly vulnerable wife to confident professional happened in the space of a few steps. It made me wonder which version was real, or if both were simply roles she played as needed. Back at Ethan's condo, I found my brother waiting impatiently. "Well, what did she want?" I eased myself onto the couch before answering. "She wants to reconcile, says she'll call off her attorney if I drop the divorce." "You're not seriously considering it," he said, more statement than question. "I don't know," I admitted. "She knew about my separate account. Has known for a year. Said that's partly why she took the money, because I'd been keeping financial secrets too." Ethan paced the living room, clearly agitated. "That's classic manipulation. Equating your prudent financial planning with her outright theft while you were under anesthesia. They're not remotely the same thing." "No," I agreed, "but I'm not completely blameless either. Creating a secret account doesn't exactly scream healthy marriage." "You created that account because on some level you didn't trust her," Ethan pointed out, "and look how right you were." He had a point, but relationships were rarely that simple. "She said I've been emotionally absent, too focused on work. And that justifies an affair and financial theft?" Ethan stopped pacing to face me directly. "Mike, listen to yourself. She's got you questioning your own perceptions when she's the one who betrayed your trust on multiple levels." His words hit home, reminding me of conversations with clients who discovered structural problems in their buildings. They often went through stages of denial and bargaining before accepting the reality of necessary repairs. Was I doing the same thing, looking for ways to avoid the painful truth that my marriage was fundamentally unsound? "I told her I needed time to think," I said. "And I do. This isn't just about her actions or mine, it's 7 years of life together." Ethan softened slightly. "Fair enough. Just promise me you'll talk to Jack before making any decisions. Get the full legal picture at least." I agreed, then retreated to the guest room, needing space to process the conversation with Rachel. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, my back aching despite the prescribed exercises and rest. Physical recovery was straightforward compared to emotional healing. Follow the doctor's instructions, do the therapy, give the body time to mend. But how did one recover from betrayal? What exercises could strengthen trust once it had been broken? My phone buzzed with a text from my office manager. "Major issue with Portland Harbor stress tests. Calculation discrepancy spotted by city engineers. Can you review remotely?" The timing was terrible, but work problems were at least problems I knew how to solve. I replied that I'd look at the data immediately, grateful for the distraction from my personal turmoil. For the next 3 hours, I lost myself in numbers and structural analysis, identifying where the discrepancy had originated and developing correction parameters. When I finally set aside my laptop, darkness had fallen outside the window, and I realized I hadn't thought about Rachel or the divorce once during that time. The next morning, I called Jack for his professional assessment of Rachel's reconciliation overture. "It's not uncommon," he explained, "when the financial reality of divorce begins to sink in, especially after misconduct has been documented. The spouse in the weaker position often attempts reconciliation as a strategy." "You think it's just strategy?" I asked. "Not genuine? Remorse?" "I can't speak to her emotional state," Jack replied diplomatically. "I can only tell you that from a legal standpoint, reconciliation would likely benefit her far more than you. The evidence we've gathered puts you in a very strong position for the divorce proceedings. She knew about my separate account, I told him. Has known for a year. Jack was silent for a moment. That's interesting timing. It corresponds with when our investigator believes her relationship with Walsh began. You think knowing about my account somehow triggered the affair? I'm suggesting that discovering your financial independence may have accelerated plans she was already considering, Jack clarified. The forensic accountant's preliminary report shows Rachel began extracting unusual amounts from your joint, checking about 14 months ago, small enough to stay under your radar, but consistent and increasing over time. The timeline aligned with her discovery of my separate account. So, rather than confronting me about the account, she began creating her own financial cushion, Jack finished, and apparently developing a relationship with someone who could offer additional security in the form of business opportunities. I thanked Jack for his insights and ended the call, my mind working through the implications. If Rachel had been systematically moving money for over a year, her betrayal wasn't a spontaneous decision, but a calculated exit strategy. The withdrawal during my surgery wasn't an impulsive mistake, but the culmination of months of planning. Yet she wanted reconciliation now. Why? What had changed? The answer came from an unexpected source. That afternoon, Ethan returned from work with interesting information. Remember how I mentioned running a background check on Walsh? He said as he removed his badge and service weapon, securing the latter in his designated safe. I didn't, but one of my colleagues recognized the name when I mentioned it casually at lunch. Recognized it how? I asked. Walsh was investigated last year for a real estate investment scheme. Nothing stuck enough for charges, but the pattern was concerning. He would charm wealthy clients, usually women, into investing in property, developments that either never materialized or were significantly overvalued. My stomach tightened. And you think that's what he was doing with Rachel? Ethan shrugged. It fits. He identifies a potential mark, your wife with access to substantial joint savings, develops a personal relationship to establish trust, then presents an exclusive opportunity that requires immediate investment. But why return the money when confronted? I wondered. If it was a scam, wouldn't he have disappeared with it? Not if he's playing a longer game, Ethan suggested. Or if he realized you had the resources to make serious trouble for him. A structural engineer with contacts in city planning and development. You could make his legitimate projects a bureaucratic nightmare if motivated. The theory made logical sense, but something still didn't add up. So if Walsh was scamming Rachel, and she's now realized it, she needs a safe harbor, Ethan concluded. And you, with your stable career and assets, are suddenly looking like a much better option than a potential con artist who's returned her investment. I sat with this possibility, turning it over in my mind. It explained Rachel's sudden interest in reconciliation, her willingness to return the money, her insistence that Walsh was merely a business partner. If she discovered his true nature, she might genuinely regret her choices, not because she valued our marriage, but because her exit strategy had collapsed. I need proof, I said finally. If Walsh is running some kind of investment scam, there should be evidence. Ethan nodded. My colleague mentioned the detective who handled the previous investigation. I could reach out, see if there's anything helpful that didn't make it into the official reports. That evening, I received a call from Jack with additional information. From the forensic accountant, Rachel had indeed been transferring money systematically for over a year, nearly $43,000 in total beyond the $7,500 withdrawal during my surgery. Most of it went to a separate account she opened 13 months ago, Jack explained. But there's something else interesting. About 3 months ago, she started transferring funds from that account to an LLC registered to Walsh. Small amounts, At first, then larger sums. Investment payments, I suggested. That would be my guess, Jack agreed. But here's where it gets peculiar. 2 weeks ago, all activity with Walsh's LLC stopped abruptly. And 3 days ago, the day before she contacted you about reconciliation, she attempted to withdraw all remaining funds from her separate account. Attempted. The bank flagged it as suspicious activity and placed a temporary hold. She'd never moved that much at once before. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Something had happened between Rachel and Walsh that prompted her to try to recover her money and seek reconnection with me. Can you find out if Walsh has any active development projects in Portland? I asked. Property conversions, specifically. Downtown luxury condos? I'll have my investigator check, Jack promised. If he's claiming to have a major development underway, there would be permits filed, contractors hired, the usual paper trail. The next day brought confirmation of my suspicions. According to Jack's investigator, Christopher Walsh had no active development permits in Portland. He had inquired about a property downtown, but the building in question was still owned by its original developer with no pending sale or transfer. In other words, Jack summarized, the investment opportunity he presented to Rachel likely doesn't exist. Ethan's police contact provided additional context. Walsh had operated in several cities across the Pacific Northwest, always following the same pattern, cultivating relationships with financially comfortable women, often married ones dissatisfied with their husbands, then leveraging those relationships for investments in non-existent property developments. He stays just on the legal side of fraud, Ethan explained, after speaking with the detective. He creates enough paperwork to claim the investments are legitimate but high risk. When they inevitably fail to materialize, he can blame market conditions, permitting issues, contractor problems, any number of plausible business complications. And returning my money? Self-preservation, Ethan suggested. You confronted him directly with evidence of the fraud. Better to return the money than face potential criminal charges. The picture was becoming increasingly clear. Rachel had discovered my separate account, felt justified in creating her own financial escape plan, and fallen for Walsh's manipulations in the process. When the investment began to seem suspicious, she attempted to recover her funds, only to find herself in a precarious position, alienated from me with dwindling resources and questionable legal standing due to her financial misconduct. Reconciliation wasn't about saving our marriage. It was about saving herself. The realization should have angered me, but instead, I felt an odd sense of calm certainty. The structural analysis was complete, and the results were unambiguous. This marriage couldn't be safely repaired. The damage was too extensive, the foundation too compromised. I called Rachel the next day. I've been thinking about what you said, I began when she answered, and the hopeful note in her voice was almost convincing. I'd like to meet again. There are some things we need to discuss in person. We arranged to meet at a small park near Ethan's condo. Neutral territory with enough privacy for a difficult conversation, but public enough to discourage dramatic scenes. When I arrived, Rachel was already there, sitting on a bench by the duck pond. She wore casual clothes, jeans, and a sweater rather than her usual polished business attire. The deliberate informality struck me as another calculated choice, an attempt to appear more approachable, more like the woman I'd fallen in love with rather than the poised professional she'd become. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as I carefully lowered myself onto the bench beside her, mindful of my still healing back. "I've learned some interesting things about Christopher Walsh," I said without preamble, specifically about his history of real estate investment schemes targeting women with access to substantial funds. The color drained from her face. "What are you talking about?" The downtown luxury condo development doesn't exist, Rachel. There are no permits, no property transfer, no construction contracts. It's a fraud. She stared at me, clearly struggling to process this information. That's impossible. I've seen the plans, the projections. Christopher has been working on this for months. Seduce plans and projections are easy to fabricate, I pointed out. Actual development projects leave a paper trail with the city, with contractors, with materials suppliers. This one doesn't exist outside of whatever documents Walsh showed you. You're investigating him? Her voice wavered between disbelief and growing alarm. Why would you do that? Because I wanted to understand why you suddenly wanted reconciliation after emptying our joint savings and conducting a months-long affair. It didn't add up. Rachel's composure began to crack, her careful mask slipping to reveal genuine distress. You don't understand. The investment is real. Christopher showed me everything, the property assessment, the market analysis, the projected returns. When did you last speak with him? I asked. 3 days ago, she admitted. He said there were some unexpected permitting issues that might delay the project. The classic excuse, just as Ethan's contact had described. And that's when you tried to withdraw all the money from your separate account, the one you've been funding for over a year with transfers from our joint checking. She flinched visibly. How did you... Forensic accountant, I explained. Standard. Procedure in divorces involving financial misconduct. Rachel's shoulders slumped, the fight visibly draining from her. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt I was seeing something genuine from her, not calculated charm or defensive anger, but raw, unfiltered defeat. I didn't know it was a scam, she said quietly. I truly believed in the investment, in him. Just like you believed our marriage was over a year ago? I asked. When you told Walsh we'd been separated that long. She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Things between us were distant. You were always working, always preoccupied with your projects. When I found out about your secret account, it confirmed what I already suspected. That you had one foot out the door. I was just preparing for the inevitable. By having an affair and siphoning money. By protecting myself, she countered, a flash of her old defiance returning. You were protecting yourself with that account. Why shouldn't I do the same? The parallel she drew wasn't entirely without merit, but the scale and nature of our actions were fundamentally different. My separate account had been an insurance policy, never intended to deplete our shared resources. Her systematic deception, culminating in emptying our savings during my surgery, reflected a willingness to hurt me when I was most vulnerable. I came here today to tell you that I won't be reconsidering the divorce, I said firmly. Whatever we once had is gone, Rachel. Not just because of the affair or the money, but because of the calculated deception over months and years. We can't rebuild from that. She was quiet for several moments, absorbing the finality in my voice. When she finally spoke, her tone had shifted from defensive to resigned. What happens now? The divorce proceeds as filed, I replied. Jack has prepared a settlement proposal that accounts for the returned funds from Walsh and acknowledges your contributions to the marriage. It's fair, more than fair, given the circumstances. I suggest you review it with your attorney. And if Walsh's investment does turn out to be legitimate, she asked, a last flicker of hope in her voice. It's not, I said gently. But if by some miracle it is, that's between you and him. Our marriage is over regardless. As I stood to leave, Rachel reached for my hand, a gesture that would have seemed natural just weeks ago, but now felt like an intrusion across a boundary irrevocably established. I did love you, Michael, she said, her voice thick with emotion. That might have been genuine remorse, or might have been mourning for her collapsed exit strategy. Whatever you believe about everything else, please believe that. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw fragments of the woman I'd married alongside the stranger she'd become. Perhaps she had loved me in her way. Perhaps I had loved her while simultaneously preparing for her departure. We had built something together once, but like a structure with fundamental design flaws, it had been destined to fail eventually. "Goodbye, Rachel," I said, gently extricating my hand from hers. As I walked away, I felt the weight of 7 years lifting from my shoulders, replaced by the lighter burden of moving forward alone. The weight of my decision to proceed with the divorce settled into a strange kind of clarity in the days that followed my meeting with Rachel at the park. Physical therapy was becoming less painful as my spine slowly healed, though the therapist warned me that complete recovery could take up to a year. "The hardware we put in your back is just support, Doctor," Mercer explained during my follow-up appointment. "Your body still needs to do the real healing work." I couldn't help but see the parallel to my emotional state. The decision to divorce was structural support, but the actual healing would take much longer. 3 weeks after Rachel had emptied our savings account, I received an unexpected call from my company's biggest client, the Portland Department of Transportation. "Michael, it's Greg Dennison. I know you're on medical leave, but we've got a situation with the Harbor Bridge analysis that I think only you can resolve." Greg was the chief engineer for the city, a straightforward man who rarely exaggerated. If he said they needed me specifically, the problem must be significant. "What's happening?" I asked, shifting position on Ethan's couch to ease the pressure on my lower back. "The stress test models you developed before your accident. They're showing potential failure points that our team can't properly interpret. The rehabilitation project is stalled, and the mayor's office is breathing down my neck about delays. Any chance you could consult remotely?" Despite everything happening in my personal life, the prospect of diving back into meaningful work was appealing. "Send me the data," I told him. "I can review it this afternoon." After hanging up, I informed Ethan about the development. He raised an eyebrow as he prepared for his shift at the police department. "You sure that's a good idea? You're supposed to be focusing on recovery." "Staring at stress test models on a laptop won't strain my back," I pointed out. "Besides, I need something productive to focus on." He nodded, understanding the unspoken part, that without work to occupy my mind, I'd be left alone with thoughts of Rachel, the divorce, and the life I was losing. "Just don't overdo it," he cautioned before heading out. The data arrived an hour later. I lost myself in the complex calculations and material analysis, the familiar patterns of structural engineering, providing a comforting framework of logical certainty. By evening, I'd identified the issue, a subtle interaction between the original bridge materials and the proposed rehabilitation components that created unexpected stress patterns during simulation. I called Greg, explained my findings, and suggested an alternative approach that would preserve the historic elements of the bridge while ensuring structural integrity. His relief was palpable. "This is exactly why we need you back, Michael. No one else caught this." "Happy to help," I said, "but I'm still officially on leave for at least another month." "What if we brought you on as a special consultant?" Greg proposed. "Remote work, flexible hours, just focused on the harbor project. The city would pay a premium rate separate from your company's contract." The offer was tempting, not just financially, but as a way to reconnect with my professional identity during a time when my personal identity felt so fractured. "Let me think about it," I replied. After hanging up, I checked my email and found a message from Jack Westfield with the subject line, "Settlement Update. Urgent." I opened it immediately, tensing in anticipation of some new complication from Rachel or her attorney. Rachel's counsel has requested mediation, Jack wrote. They're suggesting a structured settlement discussion with a neutral third party before proceeding further with litigation. This could be a positive development. Mediation is typically less adversarial and expensive than continued court proceedings. However, it's also possible this is a delay tactic. Please call to discuss. I stared at the message, considering the implications. Mediation suggested Rachel was no longer confident in her legal position, a stark change from her initial aggressive stance. The forensic accountant's report must have made it clear that continuing to fight would only expose more of her financial misconduct. Before I could call Jack, my phone lit up with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Michael, this is Christopher Walsh. We need to talk about Rachel and what's really happening. It's not what you think." My first instinct was to ignore it. Walsh had already returned the money Rachel had given him from our joint account, and I had no interest in whatever manipulation he might attempt next. But curiosity won out. What possible angle could he be working now? I replied simply, "What do you want?" His response came quickly. "To explain. Rachel's been lying to both of us. I have documentation you need to see regarding her plans. Can we meet?" I hesitated, then forwarded the exchange to Ethan, asking for his take as a law enforcement officer. His reply was predictably cautious. "Could be legit, could be another con. If you meet, public place only. Let me know when and where. I'll have a patrol car nearby." I texted Walsh back, "Powell's Coffee Shop tomorrow, 2 p.m. The next day, I arrived at Powell's early, choosing a table with a clear view of both the entrance and the street outside. The coffee shop was busy enough to ensure witnesses, but not so crowded that our conversation would be overheard. I'd informed Jack about the meeting as well, and he'd cautioned me against discussing any specifics of the divorce proceedings. Walsh arrived precisely at 2, looking noticeably less polished than during our previous encounter. His designer suit had been replaced by jeans and a button-down shirt, his perfect hair slightly disheveled. He spotted me immediately and approached with a guarded expression. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, taking the seat across from me. "I know you have every reason to distrust me." "Get to the point," I replied. "You said Rachel's been lying. To both of us." He nodded, reaching into his messenger bag to retrieve a folder. "After you confronted me about the money, I started looking more closely at everything Rachel had told me about your marriage and her financial situation. Things weren't adding up. Like the fact that we weren't actually separated for a year. That and more." He slid the folder across the table. "Rachel approached me initially as a design client for my apartment. I was recently divorced, starting over in Portland. She was talented, charming, and seemed genuinely interested in my real estate ambitions." "Spare me the backstory," I interrupted. "What's in the folder?" Walsh sighed. "Emails, text messages, and financial documents that show Rachel has been systematically planning her exit from your marriage for at least 18 months, well before she met me and before she discovered your separate account." I opened the folder reluctantly, not wanting to give him the satisfaction of appearing eager. Inside were printed copies of email exchanges between Rachel and someone named Diane Lawson, dating back to October 2 years ago, 8 months before I'd created my separate account. In the emails, Rachel discussed her extraction plan in explicit detail, how she would gradually increase her personal savings while maintaining appearances in the marriage, how she would leverage her design business to create financial independence, how she would time her departure to coincide with optimal asset division. "Who's Diane Lawson?" I asked, looking up from the disturbing evidence. "Rachel's divorce attorney," Walsh explained, "the same one representing her now." I continued reading, my stomach tightening with each new revelation. Rachel had catalogued our assets, estimated their values, and developed strategies for maximizing her share upon divorce. She'd even researched my previous projects to identify potential weaknesses she could exploit during proceedings, structural issues that might have led to professional liability, creating leverage against me. "Where did you get these?" I asked, suspicion growing. "These are private emails." Walsh had the grace to look uncomfortable. "When I realized Rachel might have been manipulating me as well, I hired someone to investigate. The methods weren't entirely above board, but the information is genuine. You can verify it with your own resources." I closed the folder, unsure whether to thank him or report him for potential cybercrime. "Why are you showing me this?" "Self-preservation, partly," he admitted. "I don't want to be dragged into a messy divorce case where I'm painted as the villain, but also—" He hesitated. "I know what it's like to discover someone you trusted has been systematically deceiving you. My ex-wife did something similar. No one deserves that." His apparent sincerity was compelling, but I remained skeptical. "These could be fabricated." "They could be," he agreed, "which is why I'm giving you the digital copies as well." He placed a USB drive on the table. "Have your brother's police contacts examine the metadata, the server information. They'll confirm authenticity." I pocketed the drive without commitment. "What about the investment opportunity you presented to Rachel? The downtown condo conversion that doesn't exist?" Walsh's expression shifted to genuine embarrassment. "It does exist, actually. The project is legitimate, but it's in the early stages, much earlier than I may have implied to Rachel. I was eager to impress her, so I accelerated the timeline. In my presentations." "You lied," I translated flatly. "I embellished," he corrected. "The property acquisition is still in negotiation, permits are pending, not approved." I got ahead of myself, and when Rachel suddenly wanted to invest substantial funds, I should have been more transparent about the risks and timeline. The distinction seemed meaningless to me, but I wasn't here to judge his business ethics. "So the money she gave you was real investment in a real project that's happening much more slowly than I suggested," he finished. "When you confronted me, I returned it because I realized she'd obtained it unethically and because the project wasn't as ready as I'd claimed. It was the right thing to do." I studied him, trying to determine if this version of Walsh, the flawed but basically decent businessman who'd gotten in over his head, was any more authentic than the smooth-talking potential con artist I'd initially assumed him to be. "There's something else you should know," he added, looking genuinely troubled. "Rachel asked me to help her liquidate your joint assets before she left you. She wanted my advice on how to move money through my business accounts to make it harder to trace." "When was this?" "About 3 months ago," Walsh said, "before your accident. She told me you were already aware the marriage was ending, that you were both just going through the motions. I believed her, which is why, when I heard about your surgery and what she'd done..." He trailed off, shaking his head. It didn't match the mutual, amicable separation she'd described. This new information, aligned with the timeline Jack's forensic accountant had established. Rachel's increased withdrawals from our joint accounts had accelerated approximately 3 months earlier. If she'd been actively planning to leave, then it explained her increasingly frequent business trips and late nights at the design studio. "Why tell me all this now?" I asked. "Because she contacted me yesterday," Walsh revealed, "said she might be reconciling with you and needed to ensure I wouldn't complicate things by sharing certain details with you, offered me an additional investment if I remained discreet about our previous arrangements." My jaw tightened. Rachel was still manipulating, still playing angles, still trying to control the narrative. Even her reconciliation attempt had been strategic, a way to protect herself from both the consequences of her actions and whatever she thought Walsh might reveal. Thank you for telling me, I said, gathering the folder. I'll have this information verified. Walsh nodded. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about my role in all this. Whatever Rachel and I had, it wasn't worth destroying a marriage over. The marriage was already destroyed, I replied. You were just one of the symptoms, not the cause. After leaving Powell's, I called Ethan and asked him to meet me at his condo. When I arrived, he was already waiting, concern evident in his expression. How'd it go with Walsh? Now, he asked, as I carefully lowered myself onto the couch, my back protesting after sitting upright at the coffee shop for too long. I handed him the folder and USB drive. He claims Rachel has been planning to leave me for at least 18 months. Says she had her divorce attorney advising her well before she even met him. Ethan skimmed the emails, his law enforcement training evident in his methodical review. If these are legitimate, she's been calculating this for a long time. The level of detail. He looked up, expression grim. This wasn't an impulsive decision or reaction to discovering your separate account. This was a coordinated strategy. Can you verify the authenticity? I asked. Walsh claims the metadata will confirm they're real. I'll have our tech team look at it discreetly, he promised. But even without confirmation, this matches the financial evidence Jack's accountant found. The timeline aligns too perfectly to be coincidence. I nodded, feeling strangely hollow. I'd thought my marriage had failed because of mutual neglect, growing apart, perhaps exacerbated by Rachel's affair and financial misconduct. The possibility that she'd been strategically planning its dissolution for years while I remained committed to our future together created a different kind of pain. The realization that my reality had been fundamentally false. You need to show these to Jack immediately, Ethan advised. If they're verified, they completely undermine Rachel's settlement position. Premeditated financial deception over such an extended period would significantly impact the court's view. I agreed, and called Jack, who arranged to meet us at his office within the hour. While waiting for the Uber to take us there, I received a text from Rachel. Have you thought more about our conversation? I really believe we can work through this together. The calculated timing, just after her conversation with Walsh attempting to buy his silence, made the message seem not just manipulative, but almost sinister in its false sincerity. I didn't respond, pocketing my phone as the car arrived. Jack's reaction to the emails was controlled, but significant. He read through the file methodically, occasionally making notes, his expression becoming increasingly severe. When he finished, he looked up at me with a certainty I hadn't seen before. If these are authenticated, they constitute what we call a smoking gun in divorce proceedings. They demonstrate not just marital misconduct, but a sustained pattern of deception with explicit intent to defraud the marital estate. What does that mean practically? I asked. It means any judge would likely dismiss Rachel's claims for substantial assets or support, Jack explained. More importantly, it completely undermines her recent overtures toward reconciliation. The court would view those attempts as additional manipulation rather than genuine remorse. Ethan, who had been quietly observing, leaned forward. There's something else to consider. Some of what's described in these emails, particularly the plans to move assets through Walsh's business accounts to hide them, potentially crosses from civil misconduct into criminal fraud. Jack nodded gravely. I had the same thought. While I don't typically advise clients to pursue criminal charges during divorce, it complicates proceedings and often extends the timeline. This level of premeditation might warrant at least discussing the possibility with the district attorney. The thought of Rachel facing criminal charges was not as satisfying as I might have expected. Despite everything, I didn't want to destroy her life. I simply wanted to protect what was rightfully mine and move forward. Let's focus on the divorce for now, I decided. If the evidence suggests actual criminal activity that extends beyond our marriage, we can address that separately. Jack seemed relieved by my restraint. A wise approach. First, let's have these emails properly authenticated. Then we'll prepare for the mediation with this new information as leverage. Rachel's attorney will quickly realize their position is untenable once we present this evidence. As predicted, Rachel's attorney contacted Jack the following day, suddenly eager to accelerate the mediation timeline. They proposed a session the following week with a well-respected retired judge serving as mediator. Jack agreed, advising me that the rapid response likely meant they'd been informed about the new evidence, perhaps by Rachel after speaking with Walsh. The week before mediation passed in a blur of preparation and continued physical therapy. My back was improving incrementally, and I'd agreed to Greg Dennison's proposal to consult remotely on the Harbour Bridge project. The technical challenges provided welcome distraction from the looming confrontation with Rachel and her legal team. Ethan's police contacts confirmed the authenticity of the emails. The technical analysis revealed they had indeed been sent from Rachel's personal account to Diane Lawson over the time frame indicated, with no evidence of manipulation or fabrication. The confirmation brought a strange mix of vindication and sorrow, proof that I hadn't been paranoid, but also final confirmation that my marriage had been a facade for years longer than I'd realized. The day before mediation, I met with Jack for final preparation. He'd assembled a comprehensive presentation of evidence, including the authenticated emails, forensic accounting reports, and testimony from Walsh about Rachel's attempts to move money through his business. Remember, mediation isn't like court, Jack advised. The goal isn't to win, but to reach a settlement that avoids further litigation. Given the strength of our evidence, Rachel and her attorney will likely be focused on damage control. What's your strategy? I asked. Present the evidence methodically, without emotion, he explained. Let it speak for itself. The mediator will quickly recognize the disparity in our positions. Rachel's attorney is experienced enough to advise her that fighting further would only worsen her situation. And if she still refuses to settle reasonably? Jack's expression hardened slightly. Then we proceed to court with the same evidence, where the outcome would likely be even less favorable for her. Diane Lawson knows this. She's a shark, but she's not reckless with her client's interests. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced Ethan's living room, my back uncomfortable, but not painful enough to justify medication that would dull my thinking. Around 2 a.m., my phone lit up with a text from Rachel. I know about the emails. Walsh betrayed me just like he betrayed you. Please, Michael, this has all spiraled out of control. Can we talk before tomorrow? Just us, no lawyers. The desperate tone seemed genuine, but after everything I'd learned, I couldn't trust my judgment of her sincerity. I showed the message to Ethan, who had awakened to get water. Classic last-minute attempt to circumvent the legal process, he commented. She's hoping for a private conversation where she can manipulate you emotionally without legal counsel present. That's my read too, I agreed, though part of me, the part that had shared a life with this woman for 7 years, felt a pull to hear what she would say. Don't respond, Ethan advised. Any communication now should go through Jack. You've got all the leverage heading into mediation. Don't risk it for a conversation that can't possibly benefit you. I took his advice, turning off my phone and returning to bed. Sleep remained elusive, but I focused on breathing exercises my physical therapist had taught me, eventually drifting into a restless slumber just before dawn. The mediation was scheduled for 9 a.m. at a neutral location, a professional suite downtown that specialized in alternative dispute resolution. Jack met me in the lobby, his confidence evident in his relaxed posture. "Ready?" he asked, as we waited for the elevator. "As I'll ever be," I replied. The mediation room was designed to minimize confrontation. A large oval table rather than opposing sides, comfortable chairs, natural lighting, and neutral decor. The mediator, Judge Eleanor Harmon, retired, greeted us with professional courtesy, explaining the process and ground rules before Rachel and her attorney arrived. When they entered, I was struck by Rachel's appearance. Gone was the polished, confident professional I'd grown accustomed to seeing. She looked tired, her designer outfit not quite concealing the strain of recent weeks. Our eyes met briefly, before she looked away, taking a seat beside Diane Lawson, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s whose reputation for aggressive divorce representation was well-earned. Judge Harmon began with opening statements, allowing each attorney to outline their position briefly. Jack went first, calmly stating that we sought an equitable division of assets that acknowledged both the documented financial misconduct and the extensive planning that had preceded it. Lawson's opening was surprisingly conciliatory. My client acknowledges certain decisions that, in retrospect, could have been handled differently. We're here in good faith to reach a resolution that allows both parties to move forward with dignity. And the diplomatic phrasing, decisions that could have been handled differently rather than systematic deception and theft, almost made me laugh. But I maintained my composure as Judge Harmon nodded and proceeded to the evidence review. Jack methodically presented our case, starting with the forensic accounting report detailing Rachel's systematic withdrawal of funds over the past year, culminating in the $8,750 removal during my surgery. He then introduced the authenticated emails between Rachel and Lawson, dating back 18 months, explicitly outlining the extraction plan from our marriage. As the emails were distributed, I watched Rachel's face. She didn't appear surprised. By their inclusion, Walsh had clearly warned her, but the public exposure of her private calculations seemed to affect her. Her composed facade cracked momentarily, genuine shame flickering across her features before she regained control. Judge Harmon reviewed the materials carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timelines or specific transactions. When she reached the emails, discussing potential methods to hide assets through Walsh's business, she looked up sharply. Ms. Lawson, these communications appear to describe activities that potentially cross ethical and legal boundaries. Did you advise your client regarding the implications of such actions? Lawson shifted uncomfortably. Those discussions were theoretical explorations of options, Your Honor. No illegal actions were actually taken. Nevertheless, Judge Harmon continued, they demonstrate intent that significantly impacts how I view the current proceedings. She turned to Rachel directly. Mrs. Brennan, these emails suggest you began planning your exit from the marriage and the strategic division of assets long before any of the precipitating events mentioned in your filings. Would you care to address this discrepancy? Rachel glanced at her attorney, who nodded slightly. She began, then paused, seeming to struggle with what to say. Our marriage had been troubled for some time. I was exploring options, preparing for various scenarios, including scenarios where you systematically misappropriated marital assets, Judge Harmon asked, her tone neutral, but the question devastating in its directness. I felt vulnerable, Rachel replied, her voice strengthening. Michael's career was thriving, while my business was still establishing itself. I needed security. Security that you sought by developing a relationship with Mr. Walsh while still married. Rachel flinched visibly. That was a mistake, one I deeply regret. Judge Harmon nodded, then set aside the documents. Based on the evidence presented, I'm prepared to offer my recommendation for settlement terms. Would you like to hear this now, or would the parties prefer to discuss privately first? Lawson leaned over to whisper with Rachel, while Jack raised an eyebrow at me questioningly. I nodded, confident in our position. We're prepared to hear your recommendation, Your Honor, Jack stated. As are we, Lawson added, after concluding her whispered conference. Judge Harmon folded her hands on the table. Given the documented financial misconduct and the evidence of long-term planning to undermine the marital estate, I would recommend the following. Mr. Brennan retains his separate property with no claim by Mrs. Brennan. The marital home should be sold, with proceeds divided 70-30 in Mr. Brennan's favor, reflecting the documented removal of funds by Mrs. Brennan. Mrs. Brennan's business remains her separate property, as it has been operated independently. Each party retains their personal retirement accounts without claim on the others. No alimony is warranted given Mrs. Brennan's established business and the circumstances of the separation. The terms were more favorable than even Jack had anticipated. Rachel's face remained carefully blank, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the table. These terms seem reasonable given the evidence, Jack responded promptly. Lawson hesitated, clearly torn between fighting for her client and recognizing the reality of their position. We would request a 60-40 split on the house, considering Mrs. Brennan's contributions to its maintenance and improvement during the marriage. Judge Harmon considered this briefly. I could support a 65-35 split if Mr. Brennan is amenable. The remaining terms would stand. Jack looked to me and I nodded slightly. The 5% difference was insignificant compared to the value of concluding this chapter of my life. We can agree to those terms, Jack confirmed. Lawson conferred. With Rachel again, their whispered exchange more intense this time. Finally, she straightened and addressed the mediator. We accept the proposed terms, with the 65-35 modification regarding the marital home. Judge Harmon nodded with satisfaction. Excellent. I'll prepare the formal mediation agreement for signing. If you'll excuse me for 20 minutes, I'll draft the document. She gathered her materials and exited to a private office, leaving the four of us in suddenly awkward silence. Jack engaged Lawson in professional small talk about an upcoming Bar Association event, their practiced cordiality a stark contrast to the adversarial proceedings. Rachel remained silent, staring at her hands folded on the table. I found myself studying her profile, trying to reconcile this subdued woman with both the wife I'd loved and the calculating strategist revealed in the emails. After several minutes of this strained atmosphere, Rachel abruptly stood. "Excuse me," she murmured, heading for the door. Lawson paused her conversation, looking concerned, but Rachel waved her off. "Just need some air. I'll be right back." Against my better judgment, I rose to follow her. Jack gave me a warning look, but I shook my head slightly. Some conversations needed to happen outside legal frameworks. I found Rachel in a small seating area near the elevators, standing by the window overlooking the city. She tensed as she heard my approach, but didn't turn around. "It wasn't supposed to end like this," she said quietly. "How was it supposed to end?" I asked, maintaining distance between us. She turned then, her eyes reddened but dry. "I don't know anymore. When I started planning, it seemed logical, practical, a business decision like any other. I didn't anticipate how it would feel when it actually happened." "When what happened? Getting caught or watching everything collapse?" "Both," she admitted. "Neither." "I don't know, Michael. Somewhere along the way, I started viewing our marriage as a transaction, an arrangement that needed to be optimized for maximum return. I lost sight of the fact that it was also a relationship between two people who once loved each other." Her candor surprised me. After months of manipulation and calculated deception, this moment of apparent honesty felt almost disorienting. "Why tell me this now?" I asked. "The settlement's essentially finalized." "Because you deserve to hear it," she replied. "Not for forgiveness or reconciliation. I know those bridges are burned, but because after 7 years you should at least understand what happened." "I'm not sure I ever will," I said honestly. "The level of planning, the duration of the deception, it suggests a fundamental disconnect in how we experienced our marriage." She nodded slowly. "You're right. While you were building bridges, I was calculating escape routes. I don't expect you to understand or forgive that. I'm not sure I understand it myself." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of 7 years and their dissolution hanging between us. "We should get back," I finally said. "They'll be waiting." Rachel nodded again, composing herself visibly, shoulders straightening, expression clearing, the professional mask sliding back into place. As we walked back to the mediation room, I realized that this brief exchange might be the most honest conversation we'd had in years, coming only as everything ended. Judge Harmon returned with the settlement agreement, and we all signed without further discussion. As we prepared to leave, Rachel paused beside me, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "I did love you once," she said. "That part wasn't a lie." Whether it was true or one final manipulation, I chose to accept it as a closing sentence to our chapter together. "I know," I replied simply. "Goodbye, Rachel." As I left the building with Jack, discussing next steps and timelines for the divorce finalization, I felt a curious lightness despite the gravity of the day's proceedings. The mediation had provided not just a favorable financial outcome, but a kind of closure, confirmation that my instincts had been right, that the precautions I'd taken had been justified, and that the path forward, though uncertain, was undeniably mine to shape. The settlement agreement with Rachel marked a decisive end to one chapter of my life. But practical matters remained. Chief among them was finding a permanent place to live. While Ethan had been extraordinarily generous with his guest room, I needed my own space to truly begin rebuilding. 2 months after my surgery, with my back healing steadily and the divorce proceeding through its final legal stages, I started looking for a home. "You could buy another place in the same neighborhood," Ethan suggested one evening, as I scrolled through real estate listings on my laptop. "Property values are still climbing there." I shook my head. "Too many memories. I need somewhere completely different." What I didn't say was that I'd begun considering a more radical change: the remote consulting work for the Portland Harbor Bridge project had reminded me how much I enjoyed complex engineering challenges. Greg Dennison had mentioned several times that the city's infrastructure department had a permanent position opening for a structural engineering director, a role that would involve overseeing all major bridge and tunnel projects throughout the metropolitan area. "It's practically designed for someone with your expertise," Greg had said during our last video conference. "The salary is competitive, the projects are fascinating, and you'd have significant input on infrastructure planning for the next decade." The opportunity was tempting, offering both professional advancement and a clean break from the life I'd shared with Rachel. But it would mean transitioning from private consulting to public service. A different pace, different challenges, different rewards. I was still mulling over this possibility when Jack called with unexpected news. "The house sold," he announced. "Full asking price, all cash offer, minimal contingencies. The buyers want to close in 30 days. The speed was surprising. We'd only listed the property 2 weeks earlier. "That's fast," I replied, feeling a strange mix of relief and melancholy. The house had been our home for 5 years, the site of both happy memories and, in retrospect, the beginning of Rachel's elaborate exit strategy. "The market's hot," Jack explained, "and your neighborhood is particularly desirable. Once the sale closes, we can finalize the asset division. According to the settlement terms, your portion would be available immediately afterward." The house sale accelerated my timeline for decision-making. With my share of the proceeds, I would have significant resources to invest in whatever came next. A new home, potentially in a new city, with a new career direction. The freedom was both exhilarating and daunting. That evening, I called Greg Dennison. "Tell me more about that infrastructure director position. What's the timeline for applications?" "They're reviewing candidates next month," he replied, sounding pleased by my interest. "I'd be happy to put in a formal recommendation. The selection committee values practical experience over academic credentials, which plays to your strengths." "I appreciate that," I said. "Could you send me the detailed job description? I want to make sure it's genuinely a good fit before pursuing it." After hanging up, I found myself drawn to the balcony of Ethan's condo, watching the city lights emerge as dusk settled over Portland. The bridges spanning the Willamette River were illuminated against the darkening sky. Functional structures transformed into works of art by thoughtful lighting design. I'd contributed to several of those bridges over my career, ensuring their structural integrity while other engineers handled the aesthetic elements. There was something profound about creating infrastructure that would outlast me, serving communities for decades or even centuries. It offered a kind of immortality, or at least lasting purpose, that few other professions could match. The potential to shape Portland's infrastructure future as a director was genuinely appealing. My phone buzzed with a text from my physical therapist, reminding me of tomorrow's appointment and suggesting I bring comfortable workout clothes for more intensive rehabilitation exercises. 4 months after surgery, I'd graduated from basic recovery to strength rebuilding, a positive sign that my body was healing as expected. The next morning, I arrived at the rehabilitation center feeling unusually energetic. Dr. Mercer noticed immediately. "You're moving more freely today," she observed as I completed the warm-up stretches. "Less guarding around the lower back. Good sign." "I feel better," I admitted. "Less pain, more mobility." She nodded approvingly. "The body responds to emotional state as much as physical treatment. Something positive happening in your life?" I considered the question. "Potential new job. My house just sold. Things are clarifying." "That tracks with what I'm seeing," she said, guiding me through a more challenging exercise targeting my core muscles. When patients start seeing a future beyond their injury, physical progress often accelerates. The session was demanding but productive. By the end, I was fatigued but not in pain, another milestone in recovery. As I was gathering my things to leave, Dr. Mercer handed me a revised exercise plan. "I'm reducing your therapy to once weekly," she announced. "You're ready for more independent management. Follow this regimen between sessions and we'll reassess in a month." It was another step toward normalcy, another sign that life was reorienting around new patterns rather than old wounds. Later that afternoon, I received the detailed job description from Greg and spent hours reviewing it, comparing the responsibilities to my experience and skills. The alignment was remarkable. Years of consulting on complex infrastructure projects had prepared me perfectly for this role. I began drafting my application that evening, revising my resume to emphasize relevant experience. Ethan found me still working past midnight, surrounded by project portfolios and technical specifications. "Haven't seen you this focused since before the accident," he commented, setting a cup of tea beside my laptop. "This job really matters to you, doesn't it?" I looked up, realizing I'd lost track of time. "It feels right, a natural evolution of what I've been doing, but with broader impact." He nodded thoughtfully. "You seem more like yourself, the old you, from before Rachel." The observation caught me off guard. Had I changed so much during my marriage? I supposed I had, gradually conforming to Rachel's expectations, accommodating her preferences, adjusting my ambitions to align with her vision of our life together. The realization was uncomfortable, but clarifying. I think I lost myself for a while, I admitted. Got caught up in being who she wanted rather than who I am. It happens, Ethan said with the wisdom of someone who'd witnessed many relationships through his work in law enforcement. The good news is you found your way back. The next morning, I received an email from Jack with documents requiring my signature to complete the house sale. Attached was a photo taken by the real estate agent, our former home, staged for viewing, all traces of Rachel and me removed to create a blank canvas for potential buyers. The dining room where we'd hosted friends, the kitchen where we'd cooked together, the living room where we'd planned our future, all neutralized and depersonalized. I felt a momentary pang, not of regret, but of recognition that a significant phase of my life was conclusively ending. I signed the documents and scanned them back to Jack, then returned to my job application with renewed focus. 3 days later, I submitted my application for the infrastructure director position. Greg texted me that afternoon, application received, initial interviews next week, fingers crossed. The prospect of interviewing was both exciting and nerve-wracking. I hadn't formally interviewed for a position in over a decade, having built my consulting practice through reputation and referrals. I spent the weekend researching the city's infrastructure challenges, current projects and future needs, preparing as thoroughly as I would for a complex engineering problem. Monday morning brought an unexpected development. Rachel had requested a brief meeting before the final divorce hearing scheduled for Friday. Jack relayed the request with characteristic caution. She says it's about returning some personal items that weren't included in the house clearing, he explained. Nothing that would affect the settlement. Just sentimental objects, she thinks, you might want. My initial instinct was to refuse what could possibly remain after months of separation and legal proceedings. But curiosity won out. Tell her I'll meet briefly. Public place, daytime. We arranged to meet Wednesday at a coffee shop near Jack's office, neutral territory, with my attorney nearby if needed. I arrived early, selecting a table with a clear view of the entrance, a habit I'd developed during this ordeal. Rachel arrived precisely on time, carrying a small cardboard box. She looked different, her designer wardrobe replaced by simple jeans and a sweater, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. She spotted me immediately and approached with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, setting the box on the table before taking a seat across from me. "I found these items while clearing out my storage unit. They seemed too personal to just mail." I opened the box cautiously, uncertain what to expect. Inside were photographs and mementos I'd assumed were lost. Pictures of my parents from before their deaths, my father's engineering compass that had inspired my career choice, newspaper clippings from my first major bridge project, even my graduate school thesis on structural integrity during seismic events. "I thought these were gone," I said, carefully lifting the compass. "Where were they?" "In boxes I packed when—" She hesitated. "When I moved your things out during your surgery. I separated what seemed most personal, intending to return them eventually." The admission that even during her most calculated betrayal, she'd shown some consideration for these sentimental items, was difficult to reconcile with everything else I'd learned about her plans. "Thank you," I said simply, continuing to examine the contents. At the bottom of the box was an envelope with my name written in Rachel's elegant handwriting. I looked up questioningly. "It's a letter," she explained. "You don't have to read it now, or ever if you prefer, but I wanted to explain some things that didn't come through during the legal proceedings." I placed the envelope aside without opening it. "Is there anything you want to say directly? We're both here now." Rachel seemed surprised by the opportunity. She looked down at her hands, then back at me with unusual directness. "I'm sorry, not just for how things ended, but for the deception leading up to it. You deserved better." The apology seemed genuine, though at this point my ability to judge her sincerity was compromised by months of discovering calculated manipulations. "Why the elaborate planning?" I asked, the question that had troubled me most. "Why not just have an honest conversation about wanting to end the marriage?" She considered this carefully before answering. "I think I was afraid of confrontation, of vulnerability, of admitting failure. Planning gave me the illusion of control." A small, sad smile crossed her face. Ironic that all that planning led to the most chaotic outcome possible. There was something almost refreshing about this apparent honesty after so much deception. Whether it was genuine remorse or simply acceptance of defeat was impossible to determine, but it offered a kind of closure that legal proceedings couldn't provide. "What will you do now?" I asked, more out of curiosity than concern. "Start over," she replied. "I've accepted a design project in Seattle. New city, new beginning." She hesitated, then added, "I heard you might be taking a position with the city." News traveled fast in professional circles. "Possibly. I've applied for an infrastructure director role." "You'd be excellent at that," she said, with what seemed like genuine appreciation. "Your work has always been exceptional." That was never in question, even when everything else was falling apart. We sat in surprisingly comfortable silence for a moment. Two people who had once shared everything, now connected only by the final unwinding of their legal ties. "I should go," Rachel said eventually. "The movers are coming tomorrow for the last of my things." She stood, then paused. "I hope the job works out. You deserve good things, Michael." I watched her leave, struck by the mundane, almost amicable nature of our final conversation. After months of legal battling and emotional turmoil, this quiet exchange in a coffee shop felt surreally normal, as if we were acquaintances parting after a casual catch-up rather than soon-to-be ex-spouses concluding years of shared life. That evening, I finally opened Rachel's letter. It was several pages of handwritten explanation, her perspective on where our marriage had gone wrong, acknowledgement of her systematic deception, and expressions of regret for specific moments of betrayal. The writing was remarkably forthright, lacking the calculated manipulation that had characterized her previous communications. One passage particularly stood out. "I convinced myself that you were the villain in our story, emotionally distant, prioritizing work over connection, creating your secret account as a first step toward abandonment. I needed to believe this to justify my own actions. The truth, which I've only recently been able to face, is that I was searching for external validation that you couldn't provide. Not because you were unwilling, but because no partner could fulfill the role I'd assigned you. The planning, the affair, the financial maneuvers, they were symptoms of my own insecurities, not responses to your failures." The insight seemed genuine, though it came far too late to salvage anything between us. I folded the letter and placed it with the other items from the box, artifacts of a relationship that had profoundly shaped 7 years of my life, for better and worse. Friday morning arrived with clear skies and unseasonably warm temperatures, a perfect Portland spring day for ending a marriage. The final divorce hearing was brief and procedural, the substantive issues having been resolved through mediation. Rachel attended with her attorney, but made no further statements beyond the required legal responses. When the judge pronounced, "Our marriage dissolved," I felt neither triumph nor grief, just a quiet acknowledgement that this chapter was definitively closed. Outside the courthouse, Jack shook my hand. "Congratulations, though that seems an odd word for the occasion. You handled this with remarkable composure throughout. Thank you for your guidance, I replied. I couldn't have navigated this without you. As we parted ways, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made my heart rate quicken. Infrastructure Director position, interview request. I opened it immediately to find an invitation to interview the following week. With the selection committee, walking away from the courthouse, away from my marriage, away from years of deception and disappointment, I felt an unexpected lightness. The path ahead was uncertain, but filled with genuine possibility rather than carefully constructed illusions. For the first time in years, I was moving forward as myself, uncompromised by others' expectations or manipulations. My phone rang, Ethan checking in on how the hearing had gone. It's official, I told him, signed and finalized. How are you feeling? He asked, the concern evident in his voice. I considered the question as I watched clouds drift across the spring sky. The city stretched out before me with its bridges and buildings and endless possibilities. Ready, I answered simply. I'm ready for what's next. The interview for the Infrastructure Director position was scheduled for Tuesday morning at City Hall. I spent the weekend preparing, reviewing Portland's major bridge projects and infrastructure challenges. 6 months after my surgery, I moved with greater confidence, my back healing steadily, though still requiring daily exercises and occasional pain management. The physical recovery paralleled my emotional one, gradual progress with lingering reminders of trauma that required ongoing attention. Monday evening, I tried on my interview suit, realizing it hung looser than before. The stress of the divorce and recovery had trimmed my frame, though recent weeks of more intensive physical therapy had begun rebuilding strength. Ethan passed by the guest room door as I adjusted my tie. Looking sharp, he commented. How are you feeling about tomorrow? Nervous, I admitted. It's been years since I formally interviewed for anything. My consulting business grew entirely through referrals. You've got this, he assured me. You're practically overqualified. Just be yourself, the real you, not the version that spent years trying to accommodate Rachel's expectations. His observations struck home. Throughout my marriage, I'd gradually modified my ambitions, interests, even my communication style, to maintain harmony with Rachel's shifting moods and priorities. The subtle compromises had accumulated until I barely recognized how much I'd changed. The divorce, painful as it was, had forced a reckoning with my authentic self. Thanks for everything, I told him sincerely. Not just the room, but the perspective. Having you as a sounding board has made all the difference. He waved off my gratitude with characteristic deflection. That's what brothers do. Besides, you've endured enough of my relationship drama over the years. I owed you. Tuesday morning arrived with perfect spring weather, clear skies and mild temperatures that hinted at Portland's brief but glorious summer to come. I arrived at City Hall 30 minutes early, taking time to center myself before the interview. The massive building represented the city's aspirations and challenges, historic architecture housing modern governance, just as the infrastructure I hoped to oversee blended legacy systems with contemporary needs. The interview committee consisted of 5 people. Greg Dennison, the city engineer who'd initially suggested the position, 2 city council members focused on infrastructure and finance, the outgoing director, a woman in her 60s preparing for retirement, and the city's human resources director. They welcomed me warmly, the atmosphere more collegial than interrogative. We've reviewed your application materials and are impressed with your project history, began Councilwoman Hayes, a forthright woman with decades of public service experience. But tell us in your own words why you're interested in transitioning from private consulting to public service. The question cut to the heart of my recent reflections. Engineering has always been more than a profession for me. It's a responsibility, to create structures that serve communities safely and effectively for generations. My consulting work allowed me to address specific challenges across multiple projects, but this position offers something different: the opportunity to shape a comprehensive vision for Portland's infrastructure future. I continued, finding myself speaking with unexpected passion about the integration of historic preservation with innovative technologies, about balancing immediate needs with long-term sustainability, about engineering as both science and civic art. As I spoke, I recognized my authentic voice emerging, not the careful, accommodating tone I'd developed during my marriage, but the engaged, principled perspective that had drawn me to structural engineering originally. The committee responded with thoughtful follow-up questions about specific projects, management philosophy, and approaches to budget constraints. The 2-hour interview passed quickly, conversation flowing naturally as we explored complex infrastructure issues. When the formal questions concluded, Greg asked if I had any questions for the committee. "Just one," I replied. "What do you consider the most significant infrastructure challenge facing Portland in the next decade, and how do you envision this position contributing to addressing it?" The question sparked an energetic discussion among committee members about climate adaptation, earthquake resilience, and transportation evolution. Their engaged debate revealed genuine commitment to the city's future. These weren't bureaucrats going through motions, but dedicated professionals wrestling with substantial challenges. As the interview concluded, the outgoing director, Dr. Eleanor Hayes, offered a final observation. "You know, Mr. Brennan, what impresses me most isn't your technical credentials, which are certainly substantial, but your evident understanding. That infrastructure isn't just about bridges and tunnels. It's about connecting communities, enabling daily life, creating shared civic space. That perspective is essential for this role." I left City Hall feeling energized rather than drained. The conversation had confirmed that this potential career shift aligned with my authentic priorities and values. Whatever the outcome, the interview process itself had been clarifying. Back at Ethan's condo, I found an email from Jack Westfield with the final financial accounting from my divorce. The house sale had closed successfully, with my portion of the proceeds now transferred to my account. Combined with my separate savings, the account Rachel had discovered but never accessed, and the rental properties I'd liquidated, I had substantial resources to begin this new chapter, regardless of the job outcome. The following day, I contacted a real estate agent to begin looking for a permanent residence. "I'm flexible on location," I explained, "but I want something with character. Perhaps an older building with good bones that needs some updating." She laughed at my description. "You sound like an engineer. Good bones instead of charming or cozy. Let me see what I can find that meets your structural standards." 2 days later, she showed me a 1920s craftsman bungalow in a quiet, northeast Portland neighborhood, walking distance to parks and local shops, reasonable commute to downtown, solid construction beneath cosmetic wear. The moment I walked through the door, something resonated. The house needed work, updated wiring, kitchen renovation, window replacements, but the fundamental structure was sound, the proportions harmonious, the potential evident. "The owners are motivated sellers," the agent explained as we toured. "The sunny backyard with its overgrown garden. They've already purchased their next home and are eager to close quickly." I made an offer that afternoon, slightly below asking price, but with minimal contingencies and a fast closing timeline. The sellers accepted within hours. The swift resolution felt appropriate. No drawn-out negotiations or second-guessing. Just a clear decision and straightforward execution. That evening, Ethan and I celebrated with takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant. First, the job interview, now a house. "You're rebuilding quickly," he observed. "It feels right," I replied. For so long I was in a holding pattern, waiting for something to change, while pretending everything was fine. Now I'm actually moving forward, instead of just going through motions. "Have you heard back about the job yet?" I shook my head. "They said the decision would take about 2 weeks. The committee needs to interview all candidates and make a recommendation to the mayor." Indeed, the following week brought the final divorce papers, officially documenting the end of my marriage to Rachel. I signed them without the emotional turbulence I might have expected months earlier. The legal conclusion felt like a formality. The key, real ending had occurred gradually through revelations and realizations, through Rachel's calculated deception and my own awakening to patterns I'd ignored for years. 10 days after the interview, Greg Dennison called as I was reviewing inspection reports for my new house. "Are you still interested in becoming Portland's infrastructure director?" he asked without preamble. My heart rate quickened. "Very much so." "Good, because the committee voted unanimously to offer you the position. The mayor has approved our recommendation. We'd like you to start in 4 weeks if that timeline works for you." We discussed salary, benefits, and transition logistics, all favorable terms that reflected the city's genuine interest in my expertise. After hanging up, I sat in Ethan's living room, momentarily overwhelmed by how dramatically my life had changed in 6 months. From a marriage I'd believed stable despite underlying tensions, through betrayal and surgery and divorce, to this new beginning with meaningful work and a home of my own, the transformation was profound. The next 4 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Closing on the house proceeded smoothly, and I threw myself into essential renovations, updating the electrical system, replacing the water heater, repairing window frames. The physical work complemented my ongoing rehabilitation exercises, building strength and flexibility as I literally reconstructed my living space. Ethan helped with weekend projects, our easy camaraderie making the work enjoyable despite its challenges. "You seem happier than I've seen you in years," he commented as we replaced rotting porch boards. "Even with everything you've been through." "I am," I realized, somewhat surprised by the truth of it. Not despite what happened, but partly because of it. The collapse of my marriage was painful, but it forced me to recognize how much I'd compromised. Myself trying to maintain a relationship that wasn't honest at its core. My final physical therapy session coincided with my last day at Ethan's condo. Dr. Mercer conducted a thorough evaluation, nodding with satisfaction at my progress. "Remarkable recovery," she pronounced. "You'll need to maintain the exercise regimen indefinitely, but you no longer need supervised therapy. Just listen to your body. It will tell you if you're pushing too hard." That evening I packed my remaining belongings into my car. The guest room that had sheltered me through the most tumultuous months of my life now looked impersonal again, all traces of my temporary residence removed. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, watching me do a final check of drawers and closets. "It's going to be quiet around here without you," he admitted. "You mean peaceful," I corrected with a smile. "No more monopolizing the bathroom or filling your refrigerator with my health food." "That too," he laughed. "But seriously, I'm proud of how you've handled everything. Not everyone comes through this kind of upheaval stronger than before." His words touched me deeply. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Sure you could have," he countered, "but I'm glad you didn't have to." My first night in the new house was both strange and profoundly right. The renovation was far from complete. Most rooms still awaited painting, the kitchen remained functional but dated, boxes sat unpacked in corners. But it was undeniably mine. I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, listening to neighborhood sounds and watching fireflies appear in the gathering dusk. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Heard you got the infrastructure job. Congratulations. You'll be excellent." R. Rachel. I hadn't heard from her since our final meeting. Before the divorce was finalized, I considered not responding, then typed simply, "Thank you." No further messages followed. Perhaps she'd needed to offer that acknowledgement as her own form of closure. Whatever her motivation, I appreciated the simple recognition of this positive development without attempts to reopen conversation or connection. My first day as Portland's infrastructure director began with a team meeting introducing key staff members, engineers, project managers, budget analysts, community liaisons, all professionals dedicated to maintaining and improving the city's physical framework. As I outlined my vision for collaborative problem-solving and forward-thinking infrastructure development, I recognized a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. That evening, I walked across the Hawthorne Bridge at sunset, pausing mid-span to watch light play across the Willamette River. Below me, water flowed steadily around bridge supports, designed to withstand decades of current. Above, cables and trusses distributed weight and tension in elegant engineering harmony. Around me, fellow Portlanders crossed on foot, bicycle, car, each journey enabled by infrastructure that most users barely noticed. I placed my hand on the bridge railing, feeling the solid construction beneath my palm. My professional life had always centered on creating and maintaining structures that connected people and places, that facilitated movement and community. Now, after months of personal turmoil and rebuilding, I'd returned to that fundamental purpose with renewed clarity and commitment. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my career ensuring bridges could withstand unexpected pressures, yet had failed to recognize the structural weaknesses in my own marriage until catastrophic failure occurred. But engineers know that failure, analysis, is often the most powerful teacher. The collapse of one structure informs the stronger design of the next. As dusk deepened into evening, lights illuminated the bridge's elegant span. I continued my walk home, toward the house I was gradually transforming, toward the life I was deliberately rebuilding, not perfect or complete, but authentically mine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.